All right. Welcome, everyone, to the aftermath of the screening and the panel discussion with three of the filmmakers whose work we just saw. So to my far left is Angela Melitopoulos, and then Kevin Lee, and then Daniel Felstead. So thank you to all of you for agreeing to participate in this and be open to showing your work side by side other works that you may not have known or may have proposed some kind of holding together the works in the same conversation. So I'm hoping this will be provocative. It was for me watching it again. Some really amazing resonances and also some major disjunctions between the works. And the last thing I want to do is impose some kind of violence of comparison on the pieces and rather address them as singularities, as specific and distinct artistic practices. And I'd like to hear some thoughts of the artists. Given that the screening was dedicated to addressing the subject of extraction in a multiplicity of ways, maybe we could begin there. Like, how do you each think of extraction in relationship to your work? How do you see it functioning in your work? We know that extraction is an enormous term that comprises what theorists call primary forms of extraction. When you think of oil drilling and coal mining, natural resource extraction, rare earth extraction as part of the new green economy, and so on. But extraction also extends to forms of exploitation of labor or unpaid labor, or the extraction of life within synthetic biology, or the extraction of data mining within social media systems and platform capitalism. So it really extends in all sorts of ways. And according to Sandro Mazzadra and Brett Nielsen, two people who write about extraction that I've been thinking with for a while, they define it as a fundamental logic of capitalism. So maybe we could start there. Angela, do you want to begin? Like, how do you think of extraction in your work?
It's very complex or difficult, different. So it's as I think when I hear such terms like this big thing, like one word, extraction, and of course it's so many different levels that you can think of. Of course, you were saying extraction of matter, like the extraction that we formally associate with the word mining, and it does play a role in crossings in the work that you could see, and it's just a part of it, but it's quite important as a theme in the work insofar as you really understand that even in ancient history, or not even ancient today, it's just classic Greek history, the Lavrion mining, which was 60 kilometers from Athens, which comes later in the film, is the basis of the building of Athens' democracy in a certain sense. So there is a combination between warfare and warfare that must be financed by extraction of mining. At the time it was, we talk about 500 BC, mining of silver, and the warfare would bring slaves. So because the first slaves were prisoners of war, of course, that came to Lavrion, which is this port near Athens, and then became slaves in this huge mine that is a kind of a very refined technological landscape of washing the matter with water flows that goes from the mountain down. So combined with social inhabitation, then that means that the slaves could then have, of course, also families, reproduction, and so on. So it was settlements along this industrial area of 500 BC, so to say, and working with an archaeological researcher in this huge area. He states that the the census that was made showed that there were around 300,000 slaves in Athens, and approximately 15,000 citizens that are not from Athens, but they are from the other cities, and perhaps 20,000 citizens from Athens. So you can say 1 to 10 in terms of the relation between the citizen and the slaves that were needed in order to build Athens as a as the so-called great democratic system that we always praise. Insofar, this is a very strong theme in the film. In Crossings, reflected upon what happens to a big gold mining problem in northern Greece, in Chalkidiki, where people fight since 10 years against it, or protest against it, where a Canadian gold miner named Eldorado Gold is kind of with very the way they got the licenses to do so was all related with this type of debt crisis, neoliberal debt crisis events, where some licenses were given without consent of the population, and so on, which is a big problem, because here we have a very small group of people who will profit from the destruction of the entire landscape that concerns about 60,000 households there, and where people live also even from tourism, but also from other kind of productions that depend on the environment and so far. And it's also related to the migration crisis that takes, this whole piece was filmed in 1617. Maybe you could see it's a kind of an idea of a multi-crisis event. So the migration crisis went on as well. And also the migration crisis is not just the very saddened event of people dying, crossing the seas, but also very many people passing and becoming the new workforce in the European countries that will labor for very low salaries and will accept most of the bad working conditions in order to feed this. So insofar, the theme of a continuation that is related to the debt crisis, but is somehow a continuation of an inequality that here is built also in as a mirror to what happened in Europe at that time, in a certain sense. So there's financial extraction, matter extraction, and we talk about these different levels in combining all these events with these little films that represent these locations.
Yeah, thank you. So the title Crossings really indicates that the multiple layers, the multiple forms of violence in relationship to extraction, going back thousands of years to the present, looking at different geographies, thinking about environmental damage, human rights abuses, police violence, and resistance to the police. I'd like to come back to that maybe later in the conversation, like strategies of resistance. But Kevin, maybe we could turn to you. How would you talk about extraction in relationship to the work that you were
right? Well, first,
to facilitate?
Yeah, I don't want to extract undue credit for the work that was presented, because it's not my work. It's a work that was produced by 3 students in a course that I co-taught with Silvia Cipiletti. Video essay for eco-cinema.
And Sylvia will be involved in a workshop tomorrow. That's why right. She's not speaking tonight, but there's no... we had to distribute the labor a little bit.
Exactly. So I want to give credit to the students, Renee Hendricks, Tobias Casado-Decker, and Marlena Fischer, for conceiving of this project, of this film within the course. It was... like I said, it was a class dedicated to using the video essay as a tool for exploring the link between cinema and ecological questions, the environment. It was my first time dealing with this subject matter myself, and I use it as kind of a laboratory for my own exploration into the topic through the work of working with the students. I wrote an essay that's published in the Woche der Kritik magazine, which you can find online, exploring this question, because video essays are a very powerful, I find a very powerful mediatic form for exploring and disseminating knowledge on various topics. Originally it was cinema. I've made many video essays on movies, but let's just say I've grown up into a world of much more interesting concerns than just how movies work. And and just to see how the workings of movies apply to larger questions of how we inhabit our planet. And I think that's very well represented by the work of these three students. This particular work started with a prompt which was the planetary desktop, because I have a background in desktop documentary. Actually, like the first desktop documentary I made was premiered at the first Woche der Kritik 10 years ago. And I asked the students to use desktop research and desktop recording, screen recording, to explore the planet. It's a very interesting kind of contradictory impulse of, well, what does it mean to explore the natural world or the planetary environment through virtual interfaces? But I think that's very much a mode of experience and knowledge acquisition that, well, especially younger generations are just used to just, Googling or looking things up rather than experiencing things directly. So these students were looking into the planetary, well, basically planetary vision, and discovered that there is an entire apparatus of cameras in outer space and satellites, and they started to investigate what are the nature of these cameras, and that led them to Elon Musk and SpaceX, and then that led them to think about how figures like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who are kind of in the process of colonizing space, were themselves influenced by the visual language of movies and TV series like Star Trek, Star Wars, and etc. And so that led to this larger project. Now, this question of extraction is interesting with regards to video essays, because a very common question I get asked, maybe almost the first question I get asked with students, is it okay to do this? Because don't I need to get like some rights or permissions from the copyright owners of these films, which are typically, Hollywood studios and global conglomerates? And well, I kind of have a cheeky reply to this, which is like, don't worry about copyright, worry about copying it right, which is thinking about your own action as someone who is taking existing material and transforming it into making it something new, producing an insight. So how do you take responsibility for this action irregardless of whatever legal implications you have? Because I think it should come from this position of personal justification. And from there you can proceed into a legal argument. So in a way you can describe this as a form of counter-extraction or critical extraction. So it's kind of, because we have very negative associations with the word extraction. But when it comes to using found footage work, okay, I mean, it's extraction. So how do we take that action of extraction and think of it as a critical intervention?
Yeah, that's great and so important to raise, I think. We were discussing before the screening our understandings of extraction in relations to complicity. And in a way, the fact that we're all, to some degree, complicit with conditions that we oppose and part of an extractivist project insofar as we exist within capitalism. But that's not to say that all forms of extraction are the same or of the same degree. So that's really important to bring out, I think, and to propose to put on the table immediately that there can be a kind of counter-extraction or a critical approach, an intervention into extractivist logic. Maybe that's a good segue to Daniel.
Yeah, I think the notion of kind of extraction is the kind of like base condition, I think, for both the work that myself and Jen produce, but I think also just in a way my whole life. I think I do see it as a kind of like the base condition is kind of this like a different forms of extraction, and you're kind of like just in it, and you're just having to try and find your way through it, like navigate your way through it, and try to find ways in which you could use that extraction for either your benefit or to kind of create moments of autonomy or agency, or just kind of respite. So I mean, I think if you, the film itself and the previous film that it was part of a kind of collection, there's kind of it is really, I mean, one way to read those films is to kind of think about them as kinds of forms of extraction, different forms of extraction, like right from the start. The AI-trained voice of Julia Fox was extracted from videos, interviews with her, initially without her permission. We trained the model and worked with it, and only at a certain point did she see one of the kind of early versions, and she really liked it and said, "You could do whatever you want with it, it's fine." But that was, we at the time that we did this, we didn't have that technical permission, and even like getting the sort of getting the service or the platform that allowed us to actually train it, we also had to sort of trick that into pretending to be Julia Fox in order to give rights for us to be able to use it, that model, right? So I say this in terms of the fact that we're completely complicit in all of this. All of the footage there, all of the kind of found footage was stuff that we had scraped and mined. Interestingly, these kind of words are also kind of whatever. So and even the kind of I guess even the what you could class as kind of original footage was using Runway to create kind of text to image images or generated images, and then put them into some kind of other kind of AI model that would then kind of lip sync it to certain things. So, I mean, as I say, I think like for in terms of the production of the film, I mean, kind of this kind of form of extraction is kind of embedded right from the start. I mean, I've just wrote here. I mean, I think in a way it is like, it is the condition that we're in, and so if you're in that condition, you just my view is like, fuck it, we ball. Like, okay, we're in it, so why not like use it and try to find some way to make something possibly interesting, even if it's just for yourself or for people who you think may get something out of it. So yeah.
And I'm sure you got Elon Musk's permission too.
Yeah, complete. Yeah, totally.
So, thinking about what I mentioned before, the fact that the work comes from like originally very different contexts. Like Angela's, your project was commissioned by Documenta in 2017, and is shown in that installation format that you showed images of right in advance of the excerpt that we watched. Whereas Daniel's work is really an intervention into social media platforms online. And Kevin's project with his students is really, I think of it as a kind of pedagogical experiment. So maybe each of you could talk about like who is your audience? How do you think of the audience? And what kind of possibilities for agency or criticality or politicization do you extend or do you think about in relation to your audience? Angela, do you want to start?
Again, here, right. So there's a few things maybe that we can note on that. First of all, the way of viewing that work is very different from desktop. It's some sort of a viewing where the viewer has a mobility. He can turn around to the left, to the right. He can walk in the space, listen to different sound. The sound is spatialized. It is something which is quite important for me because I become less and less tolerant to single screen viewing situations, insofar as I find them too totalitarian and too much depending on an established system of image representation that I really despise and that I think are somehow weapons or weaponized machines of what I actually try to kind of deconstruct in a certain sense. So I need 2 screens at the moment minimum. This is how I work, even though it's not very practical in terms of showing these works. But I must say also this constant perhaps thinking about museums and gallery spaces and where can this work be shown and so on. Of course, this needs to be supported somehow. It is, but one cannot think of smaller versions of it in a certain sense. But then I think the public is quite mixed public, which I like actually, because I think that I don't like designed publics. I really despise designed publics. So people who are, how you say, aimed at as a public for specific products. I think this is also as boring to me as single screens in a certain sense. But I think in the production itself also, I'm a step-by-step machine, let's say. I think we must understand process-based procedures that are machines. It's not that machines are only these tools, but step-by-step procedures are machines. They can be social machines. They are machinic as well. And I think it is better because it gives me some open space to cope with something that I call the real or the realm, something like that, which is actually a much bigger power than many things that could come to me via a lot of formative machines, like production machines that are proceeding with step-by-step procedures that are not for me and not made for me and not talking to me. So in that sense, I find it quite terrorizing to do this type of desktop film. But I mean, as much as you can be transposed by it or transferred to it, and of course I think we need to think, and I like to think with this type of things. I mean, that's great that we can think, it's very great to allow thinking with it, and I think this is video essay shows that, as other video essays as much, but in reality we see just US imperialist films in this essay. We don't see Asian science fiction or any other or indigenous.
There's one Soviet
film. Solaris. So I mean, I think it's okay. I mean, it doesn't matter for the thesis that is great, which is the last sentence of the thing. I think that we need to establish different types of ecosophical thinking in order to deal with the matter. But it is it's an output of the screen in its homogenized subjectivities of doomsday. And I have been together too much with Italian thinkers, and in a certain sense, one of the first thing to be really careful is if someone is preaching, you just leave the church, because it's just it's getting too monotone at some point. So this is I have this immediate reaction to these type of things, and there are many great works. I don't want to evaluate them, but I don't like preachers. I don't like doomsday preachers. I think it's the affair of old men, And yeah. And some people have to build the future in a different way. So, whatever.
All right, so things are getting a little warm. I just want to point out that there's.
I gotta stick up for my students.
Before we get to you, I just want to note that there's some. The organizers have placed some rum on the table, so if anyone wants to, like, like chill a little bit, that's great. But it is, we are all dedicated to criticality here. I take all the blame, of course. Kevin, you want to respond?
Yeah, gladly. I mean, and I really appreciate what you said earlier about we can't ignore what we're inside of. And with my students, Sylvia and I did expose them to a range of eco-cinema, but the thing is with eco-cinema, it's still a form that's being defined, like what defines an ecological film. And it turns out that, it can be any number of films because I took a key line from Jean-Luc Godard when he said, like, I don't make political films, I make films politically. So by this, I mean that instead of designating certain films as ecology films or science fiction films, we have to apply an eco-conscious lens onto whatever film that we regard. And in their case, it just happened to be that, they are early 20-something students who've been fed a steady diet of mainstream Hollywood entertainment for most of their lives. But the hope was that this class would give them a new lens with which to critically interrupt their consumerist gaze and start to really interrogate these films. And if you say so. But yeah, maybe a little too forcefully, because you're also critiquing that it was like overly, how do you say, polemical, too much old man energy. But that's because there's, well, yeah, there are many things. No. But I just want to say that, this question of audience. Well, I mean, there are interesting things to really poke at here, because it is remarkable how they use text in this video essay, and you can actually trace a historiography of how text has been used in essayistic forms from early 1920s Soviet propaganda. But this video essay, I'd say, actually still bears legacy traces of Facebook's effect on the video essay. Because, fun fact, around 2014 or so, there was the legendary pivot to video when Facebook convinced the entire media and journalism industry that, to really take advantage of the tremendous audience that we, Facebook, can bring to you, you need to start producing video content, and you need to produce video content that can be very catchy through use of bold text. And so this is really a trace of that moment of media history where Facebook's capitalization of the aesthetics of journalists, of knowledge dissemination, took this form. And I don't know. I mean, you can argue it both ways. That you see how the effect has had on these young students, but at the same time, it's like they take this form of rhetoric and discourse that's been kind of force-fed to them in a very formative age, and they're like speaking back to it or back through it, if you see what I mean. It's like if you've been fed a diet of junk food your whole life, can you somehow, I don't know, vomit a critique that can deliver you to some, another understanding or another possibility? I mean, maybe that's not so grumpy an insight. Okay.
Daniel, you could pick up right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
A lot of implications for I think your work is really about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess, one way to read the film is this kind of, like a result of this kind of feedback, it's like, actually, it's interesting. Maybe this. I'll just quickly say the sort of how this film came about, or whatever. So, the film came about because so it was commissioned by Dis or Dis.art, who I don't know if you know, who they're kind of a New York collective, who actually, after curating the Berlin Biennial in 2016, like pivoted towards producing or running this video platform with the premise of this kind of term called edutainment. So they wanted to like commission films or works that had this kind of educational dynamic to it, but also had this strong emphasis of kind of entertainment. So that's the kind of so I was commissioned by DIS to produce this film and the film prior to that. But that actually came about. I mean, I was in kind of friends with DIS in some form, whatever, for a while. But that came about actually initially through when Meta released their sort of presentation of their vision for the metaverse. I just started shitposting about them and about what a kind of dumb vision of whatever it was that they were presenting. As a result of that, and doing that kind of relentlessly in a slightly sort of deranged fashion, a number of people asked me to sort of give lectures, give kind of like talks based on those shitposts. And I'm an academic, so I kind of thought, oh, it's easy to do. I can do that's fine, whatever. I can turn this thing into a kind of academically, whatever, understandable kind of lecture.
Your video was very academic.
Yeah. So, and then DIS saw these lectures and said, oh, do you want to convert the lecture into a video essay for them? And I thought, oh yeah, that's easy. I've got all the kind of presentation notes. I've got all this, like, fine. Obviously, saying fine, it ended up not being fine because it took a long time, blah, blah, all these things. So, but I guess that just in terms of like the kind of process was very much starting from shitposting, and then that was the kind of starting point really for this whole kind of project. And I mean, I think the thing is like, I guess the other thing to think about is in regards to the film is it was very much focused on the platform, both in terms of like recognizing that it was produced for the platform, and it was kind of about platform or platform capitalism, the dynamics of platform aesthetics, etc., which then means, in a sense, that there was a strong emphasis on understanding the relationship that someone viewing something on a platform has a particular form of attention and expectations. So this film and the previous film, which is called The Metaverse and Janky Capitalism, was really, there's a really strong emphasis on this notion of kind of affect and attention, and that was very much about the fact that it was made for the platform. I guess the other thing that I think is important from my perspective, which I think is a kind of critical position in a sense, is that it does see that this work and the previous work principally as content, and I'm in a way I'm kind of reluctant to even think about it as a film. For me, it's like it is content, and the reason why I'm really kind of focused on that is that the film piece of content, whatever, I think like one of the major aspects of it is this attempt to try and collapse content and content hierarchies, and then reassemble them in certain ways. And so there is a real attempt in this film and the previous film to really not make any hierarchical distinctions between the content that is being displayed, recognizing that there are different qualities to them, aesthetic qualities, etc., but in principle it would like very sort of agnostic about the content itself that makes up the film, etc. So I think that's sort of a very important kind of position from my perspective in making this work, and I think that is partly like why there is several curators who've seen the films and blah blah have kind of mentioned how there is this kind of effect that it has, which is a little bit like similar to seeing content on your feed, and there's this kind of like strange relationship to the kind of images or the things that are being presented to you. That wasn't like a totally conscious thing. Like, it wasn't like, I want to make a film like as if you're, you know, but I think there is like there is a connection there. And that is really principally because it is designed for the platform, and it's sincere about the platform as its primary means or kind of output.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions if you have any. So please consider if you have a question. I want to ask one more, and then we can open things up. But coming back to what the exchange between Angela and Kevin, it was, from my sense, it was about like what's most effective within aesthetic forms, what can potentially be a turnoff or can be less than compelling, and that raises the question of rhetorical approach and the where aesthetics and politics for me come together. And one way to think about this, at least I have, in relationship to all these films, is how they situate themselves in relationship to what we could call spectacle, like the spectacle of capitalism, or the way Debord defined the spectacle in society. The spectacle, he said, the spectacle is capital accumulated to the point where it becomes image. So this raises lots of interesting questions about accumulation that is fundamental to extraction, and also the point where it becomes image. And maybe like with the three of you, like Angela, maybe Denise Ferreira da Silva and Arjuna Newman's film is the most extreme on this in terms of the refusal. I would say coming from a black feminist politics, a refusal to let us dwell in the cut, in the blank space of the absence of the image. But Angela, your film, I also think of in a way as a kind of refusal of the spectacular, and an insistence on a very critical conceptualist space.
I mean, I have a long story about defining the image as you were just announcing it. Yeah.
Okay, just let me finish, and then we'll come to you. And then Kevin, you're also with your students. You're appropriating and showing spectacle in order to analyze it critically from a point outside of it. So there's a kind of distanced criticality to your aesthetic approach. And then Daniel, I feel like everything breaks down, and it's really like is it over-identification? Is it critical mimicry? Is it like just acknowledging the total internalization of spectacularization within these new formations of bodies, of new image experiences thanks to AI and so on? So maybe you could each address your relationship to this.
But I think there is, because there is a lot to be said about that, and maybe we have the time in the workshop tomorrow to do this really. But I mean, like image technologies are a compression of time, and there are philosophers who claim that actually material is also a compression of time. Matter is time. So there is a relation between time, matter, and image. So we can also see these technologies some sort of development of that area, which is bringing us to really science fiction type of ideas, such as where the dissociation between content and form is not anymore so a given. It's like where you could say that there is some sort of a process where everything is informing, or what information is as matter, or what matter is as information. So it's informing each other all the time. And I rather like to think with that type of ideas as I can get them in a certain sense. So
and just to intervene there, Denise Ferreira da Silva talks about removing form from matter. So she's
exactly. It's really a fantastic piece, and I think these ideas give us possibilities to see things in a different way as well. As perhaps it was not quite just what I said before in terms of desktop and so on, and other industrially produced type of imagery, But for me, industrially produced imagery, first of all, is involving all these other processes of hierarchies, of underpaid thousands of people who are working for, of bad intentions, of normopathic orders of humans, like 5.5 groups of humans that exist, that have to make endless, how you say, where they had these old films where they're always like 8 bourgeois people discussing in one room forever or something. Like it's a genre in a certain sense, a closed game in a certain sense, right? So I think that to think with the material in terms of this processes that are actually more open, or perhaps we have to at least reflect the boxes that we are dealing with, right? And any act of viewing is attributing intentionality and affect back to the product that we see. So when I watch Elon Musk, I give power to Elon Musk. And I don't want to give power to Elon Musk. So I'm watching other stuff. And it has not a huge audience, but perhaps it has an audience that is more networked or somehow coming together on a different level or different possibility to come together in a certain sense. So in extraction in terms of image, it's not a natural it's not a natural event that I have to watch this type of women on screen, right? Sorry to say. It's just annoying. Sorry. And it shouldn't be normal that this is the prototype of some sort of a future or something, or this type of voices. It's a very boring reproduction of the machinic that was eternally always associated to the woman who is a reproductive machine in the household and in the sexual lives, and so on and so on and so on. So if we are overwhelmed with visions of the future that are actually reproducing this type of ideas, then it's part of the machine. So in a certain sense, that can be discussed. Everything, we are all part of the machine, of course, but we can give agency or intentionality. So if I have something in front of my eyes that is already so packed of intentionality, and not only good intentionality, of intentionality to capture the one who looks at it, to please all these guys who want to look at these women, apparently, or whatever, and to kind of be subordinate slaves, new slaves, the fascination of slavery, and so on. But we know that culturally speaking, we have other, reports, narratives, stories that are interacting on different complexities in a certain sense, and that's the last line of the desktop is fine. We need to find other ecosophies to deal with this type of visions of the future, or so on. So because we had always had these moments where new machines came to the society and everybody was there was a big outcry. Wow, cinema, wow, video, wow, whatever. I mean, every time there was a lot of thinking of what that can do. But we must also remember that the industrial revolutions have created lots of misery, because a lot of people actually had to change in a certain capitalist system where they they were not given chances to recompose themselves, but just
it's happening all over again, even faster.
Apart, and this will be some outcome. So if this is an outcome or possible outcome, I really want to debate this because it's concerning me. So I want to really discuss this.
So in your comment, Angela, I'm not sure if you're thinking of Daniel and Jen's film in terms of gender politics and the social machinic as it appears in their video, or their whatever. What do you prefer to call it? Is it a video or is it a?
Call it video. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
It's just my hang-up. It's fine.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if you want to respond to any of that, what Angela was talking about, and especially in terms of the gender politics in your work, the kind of queering of imagery in a way. Maybe Jen would also like to talk or speak to that if we can get a mic to Jen. Maybe she has something to say. Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, one thing was like when I was thinking about who could narrate this story or thing, like I was really conscious that I didn't want it to be my voice, partly because I've got a shit voice, but also partly because I didn't want like a sort of middle-ish aged white guy saying like whatever. So I was kind of that was sort of part of it. And then so as a result of that, then it was like who. Again, like going back to the kind of questions of like this kind of attention and affect and things like that. It was like what voice or what person has a certain presence that has a unique voice. I mean, I think like Julia's voice is amazing, and I think that Julia is amazing. So it was kind of thinking about what voices has a particular kind of affective quality, and also what character has a particular position in contemporary culture who is kind of has that kind of presence. And like Julia was very much like at the sort of top of the list there, so it was kind of like that was more thinking about again this kind of like affect and sort of cultural position of the narrator. Yeah, so that was that. I mean, I think, obviously, one can quite legitimately sort of critique using Julia for this purpose. And I totally accept it as that is a critique, and you're quite right in thinking that. I mean, for me, it was more like, if anything, it was more like a kind of operation of a kind of fan fiction. Like, I really think Julia Fox is amazing. And I think for me it's more of a fan fiction, which doesn't mean that gets you off the hook. But I think in developing the voice of Julia, you also learn through using it that actually I was not so much in control of it. Like through the development of it, there was sort of something that happened where, it was kind of leading me in certain directions in terms of the kind of narrative style, etc., etc. So so that's how I would position it. But I mean, I was certainly like conscious of it, but I don't know in terms of like engaging with people, engaging with imagery of say like Elon Musk, etc., etc. It's like, I totally recognize the position of not wanting to see these figures, but I don't know, like I'm just, for myself, I just don't feel like I'm in the position. I would say that's a kind of luxurious position to be in somewhat, like, and I'm not in that position. Like, I'm just confronted with these things all the time, and that's willingly. Like, I'm online a lot, I kind of view on social media a lot, whatever. So in a way, this is just part of my reality. And I think what we were trying to do with the film is, rather than sort of reject that, which is a totally legitimate position, critical political position, etc., rather than doing that, is actually say, like, can you expose these people for the ridiculousness of them? Like, they're super dumb. Like, the shit that Elon Musk is saying is stupid. Like, he's a really, really dumb person. Like, and I don't care if people say, oh, he's really intelligent, it's really whatever. He's not at all. Like, just listen to actually what he's saying. It's like, it's stupid. So I think, like, my approach is like let's expose these idiots for what they are. And I think the thing is like, I really just wanted to pick up on this kind of, you mentioned the thing about the body or bodies, and I think that is a really crucial part of the film. And the previous film is that there was a real attempt to expose their incredibly weird ideological position in relation to bodies. Like, they fucking hate bodies. Like, they really, really do. And like, they want to get rid of them because they're a nuisance, because they're really complex. And they've messed up their kind of view of like, and their ideological positions of say like, oh, you can just kind of extract all of this data from someone's mind and you can put it in the cloud and then it's kind of whatever. Like, it's idiotic. And do you think there is like massive political implications in that? And I think we can see the results of those political implications right now in Palestine. Because there's an absolute sort of, there's an absolute kind of, there's absolutely no respect for bodies. And so I think, like this is like a kind of, there is a sort of thing that's going on here. I mean, there's massive implications between sort of like OpenAI. I mean, just recently, the 10th of January, OpenAI changed their use policy that removed in their kind of number 2 in their policies, they very quietly removed the explicit prohibition of OpenAI or ChatGPT, etc., for for military and warfare. So they kept weapons, prohibition of development of weapons, but they very quietly removed military and warfare. So these things are like massively connected. And I don't know, like, not that the film itself is really, like, it's not dealing with that in a very explicit way, but there is a sort of connection between this warping or this kind of really, really weird and stupid kind of ideological position in relation to the body, and then the sort of willingness that organizations, states, whatever, can do to bodies.
Can I just say one small thing? Because to your thing, to the AI thing, there is this new book from Matteo Paschinelli. It's called The Eye of the Master, and it's kind of a social history of artificial intelligence. And I think it is very interesting to read because it takes away some of this, let's say, apocalyptic threats of AI and fills it with a social history. And for example, it's very funny that the first computer were women who were working in London, I think, in a factory type of space to make calculations for the market. They were called computers. Okay, so these are the bodies that are. Elon Musk doesn't want to talk about it, but they are there in a certain sense. Also, even if computers today make these calculations, there is still a lot of bodies working in these industries.
Often now at the moment, within kind of AI development, it's like in places like the Philippines. There's massive people that are kind of like cleaning data or kind of categorizing data. So like as the lady in the end of the film was mentioning, like you can't get rid of bodies, but there is this kind of ideological aspect to it, which.
And another book that comes to mind is Anthony Lowenstein's book, The Palestine Laboratory. He talks about how AI is being used in warfare and targeted assassinations, including in Gaza right now. I wanted to come back to Jen. You don't have to, but do you want to add anything? Because Jen Lung is a co-maker of the video with Daniel, and she's participating in the workshop tomorrow. So she'll speak tomorrow. But do you want to add anything now?
Yeah, I didn't realize the microphone was already prepared for me. I guess I'm trying to think of the film as also like a world-building practice, and on the gender and Julia Fox issue, there's this casting process in the film where we chose a few characters, including Julia Fox. So there's Eliza Yukowski, there's Connor Leahy, and there's Julia Fox, so on and so forth. So I feel like the characterizations are interesting because we're casting Julia as this super sassy, also quite like intelligent voice, but we're also dealing with AI as a tool for identity play. So like referencing Holly Herndon, Matt Dryhurst. We're thinking about like spawning identities, like how can a film character, it's this kind of like mysterious narration that can cross over between different characters. And because like we're focusing a lot on like game design currently, there's this fluidity between characters that can flow. What were the other questions around?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
At this point.
And there's also a workshop tomorrow where we'll talk about the idea of extraction, but in the material processes of like image generation. So hopefully to do something purposely extractive and see what we can do together. Don't have anything.
Thanks.
More to
Thank you.
add.
Just before we open it up to, if anyone has a question, raise your hand. There'll be a mic going around. But Kevin, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, because listening to Angela and about this question of, do you ignore the thing that's kind of terrorizing you or tormenting you, or do you confront it? And which I think your work does quite fascinatingly. It really makes me think about things I experienced in this class with students, and things that surprised me about what types of movies they were fixated on that they would want to engage with. These are students in Switzerland, and yet there were two students who wanted to make almost all of their video essays about Hollywood Vietnam War movies. And and I was a bit dubious about it, but I kept poking them. Well, this is a class about eco-cinema. So if you can somehow relate your fascination with Hollywood Vietnam War movies to eco-cinema, then we can talk. And they came back with this fascinating final project that was an eco-critical interrogation of the carbon footprint of Vietnam War movies. Well, not just the carbon footprint, in terms of just it was just like montage of explosions and just within the context of an eco-critical lens, you're made to think about just what kind of resources, what kind of violence on the natural environment is being inflicted for the sake of entertainment or art. I mean, films like Deer Hunter, Platoon, Apocalypse Now, that's won awards at Cannes or Oscars. And not to mention the labor that was used, like in a film like Apocalypse Now, which basically exploited villages of Filipino people who were living there. So I find it, and I wondered if it was a kind of therapy in a way that, because I had to think, how did they come to be so fixated on these films in the first place growing up in Switzerland? What does that say about Hollywood's, reach and its imposition of its visions and the prioritization of, an American imperialist view of the world onto people in Switzerland and all over the world?
Careful, this is being sponsored partly by the U.S. Embassy.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't be at the reception. But anyway, so what is the process through which to go through and critically interrogate that kind of like indoctrination process that one doesn't even realize that they're going through when they watch a movie?
So say something mean?
You want to say something mean? It'll be the first time.
Regression is a part of a temporary phase of psychotherapy. So you go into regression before you go out of it.
So, and I think this.
It's true that there are different types of film. There are regressive genres of film, cinema.
And Hollywood really trades in that,
some
for
are
sure.
Regressive.
Yeah.
Some are more.
Well, even the progressive ones. Well, it's the other example I was going to say was another pair of students made an eco-analysis of Hollywood animated movies that are actually promoting an ecologically progressive view. I can't name them off the top of my head. I think Trolls is one of them, what's this one with the penguins in the Arctic, and yeah. Anyway, so and these are meant to kind of instill eco-conscious values to young people at an early age, and so it's part of Hollywood's progressive agenda on the one hand, but these students then were made to think about just all the energy being used in server farms, the carbon footprint being generated from that, as well as laborers in the Philippines or India who are being exploited at exhausting work hours at low wages. So there's always a cost. There's always a price tag. And so, and so it is about kind of being made to confront these realities, because I wonder, and maybe this is a way of meeting you where you're doing, because you're very much bearing witness to people who are just in very desperate situations and interrogating the conditions that lead to those situations.
But they're less depressed, I think. They are less depressed. I mean, one of the issues of activism is you go out of yourself. You look out with the lens. You don't look and repeat the same thing again and again and again. It's a different. It's like another landscape of differences. Let's say it's not homogenized at that degree, at that density.
Yeah.
So you have it's a different way of looking at things, and especially activism. Intentionally, they want you to be there. It's also a positive relation of an alliance. It's not that you film something against somebody or something, right? It's a kind of a different alliance in a certain sense. So, I mean, these are just different intentionalities that form the whole thing, that matters the whole thing, right? So I think criticality is great, right? But it is always the question there. I mean, who is the hand who is writing this stuff, right? I mean, what are the conditions of writing? Somehow I find a certain degree of industrialization contains a lot of violence that I never managed to enter, well, fortunately for somehow. So, yes, so that's, but I think there is another real problem, and you have announced that in the AI essay, which is that some part of the technology that we are dealing are not anymore significant, but they are pattern recognition technologies. So they are driven by forces, not anymore by ideas of representation of ideas that are either good or bad or whatever, or they are pattern recognition machines. They are not algorithms. They are pattern recognition, meaning this is a different logic, and this is a quantitative logic that defines the social in retour in a certain sense, perhaps in a different way than what you have depicted, but it will be of such problems. And for me, it's like, as you say, you're kind of overwhelmed with this something. I mean, it will even become worse because it's pattern recognition. It's not algorithms.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, just maybe just in counter to that slightly is like the content that is in the films. I do actually kind of really, really love that content. Like I don't have a kind of I don't think it's like horrible or ugly. I actually love it. And I mean, I could like almost like go through all of those clips and identify bits that I think is just something that's really beautiful has happened. So I think that's what I do. And then maybe the film does also have this, is like, do have a very, I guess like a kind of ambivalent relationship to it. Like it's not coming from a point of resistance. Like I do love this content, and like I watch it all the time, and I download it, and I like scrape it, and all these things. And I've got like, I mean, we'll talk about this in the workshop tomorrow, but I've got like many hard drives just full of videos that I've like downloaded like from Twitter and Insta and TikTok, etc., that I genuinely just love as a thing. So I recognize what you're saying, but also from my perspective, I also sort of like do love that this content.
Should we take some questions? Yes. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Yeah, there's one right here immediately.
Well, I've been just thinking about it. I've just been reflecting on the sort of debate, and it took me back to the sort of first moment when you asked about extraction, and I think there was the idea that using the word extraction for found footage filmmaking, which I felt kind of weird about. And so I wanted to kind of go back there maybe just a little bit, because I was thinking about the Denise Ferreira Silva film, and then also Rabindranath Tagore and Odlit Group. Serpent Rain, for instance, has a lot of found footage in it, but I cannot imagine them using the word extraction for doing what they were doing. So I was thinking about that. I was thinking why, what's hinging on this word, and it kind of comes maybe to what Angela was saying about the whole separability issue, which is the key concept, I guess, about form, content, and how you position yourself. So I guess my question is, also the other thing that I was thinking is kind of interesting is that this whole program is called Extraction, but all the films are essay films, right? So, and that's not exactly there in the title. And maybe that's what led to the sort of like, well, maybe found footage filmmaking is a form of extraction. But yeah, I guess I guess my question is, how can we think of extraction in relation to like an essay filmmaking practice? How do we resist extraction? I guess that would be my question. How do we resist, and I think that there is something, the answer is something to do with form and content and sort of creating these kind of non-linear, I would say, kind of arguments, but I don't want to ask the question and answer it myself, so I'll give it back to you all to maybe just respond to that question.
Thank you. Anyone would like to respond to that?
I was thinking also this thing about extraction is interesting because it's referring to really a modern type of a relationship, no? I mean, we had other type of relations, like exchange, for example, exchange of knowledge. There were societies who did exchange knowledges. It was not extracting knowledge all the time or extracting manners. There was an exchange. It was, there's not the only one doomed humanity that we are in now. There were other societies, which is this great attempt to describe more egalitarian, more sustainable, more ecosophic societies that had forms of exchange. And there is even other philosophies that would say it's about creation of a common vision. So before Aristoteles, who had this talent to separate everything into infinite elementalist type of quality and character, there were other people who would say, okay, if we are kind of talking together, actually it's not me and it's not you, it's something in the middle, it's something there that is created, something third, which is a big theme in cinema, the third image, the image between the image between the two images and so on. So it's then again not only the logic of extraction, but of creation or of cooperation or of exchange of knowledge or of building networks or building narratives, even exchanging. So it's an entire different notion. And so far, of course, we must critique extraction and understand what is this industry is doing with the people's eyes. But we also must remember at some point that there is other forms of exchange, maybe something.
I mean, yeah, you might have already answered the way I would have addressed the question, because for me it's just a way of acknowledging that there is, maybe extraction is not the most precise word, definitely not the most, I don't know, heartwarming language to use, but it's the fact that we, as human beings, we are using resources we take from the natural environment, you know, we wear clothes that are derived from resources, eat food, etc. And so media itself is a form of this. So, and I guess I take it from a position of like not trying to be romantic about it, but more like as a way of thinking honestly, like, okay, I am taking this just the way I take other resources, and then how can I do so in a responsible way, or what are the implications of my taking? I think you were saying before, TJ, that yeah, it's something about acknowledging a certain complicity, but then, you know, but I really appreciate your sensitivity to certain words, and so, like, you know, words like complicity, words like, okay, what are the, you know, are there other words that we can use that can give us a new way of understanding this, that doesn't make us feel ashamed to be alive because we're just our very existence is, you know, destroying the planet. So
yeah, I would really agree with Angela. And actually, the title of this screening isn't extraction; it's elemental bodies, and we haven't really gotten into that, partly because neither Denise Ferreira da Silva nor Arjuna Newman could be here and participate in the discussion, because the title was really inspired by their approach to this, which is not extractive. It's a kind of, what, in a way, resonant with what Angela was just talking about. It's like relational. It's ethical. It's mutuality. It's responsibility to between different people or within a community space. So that's how I would think about it. So I'm not proposing with the program that everything is extractive and we just have to, you know, commiserate over this. Right, we can develop other modes, and that was one reason also to include the Olive Group's film, and to bring up Tagore as another model of a kind of early 20th century Indian eco-philosophy that unfortunately never happened. But I think they made it very much in counterpoint to the current conditions of a Hindu nationalist India that's very extractive under Modi right now. So that's they couldn't be here either, unfortunately. So the conversation focused on what it has, which was partly extraction, but that's not the only thing that's meant to be going on here. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Should we take another? Yeah. We have one over here and then one right there. Maybe we could take two. So whoever goes first, and then
I go first.
Yeah, go ahead. Go
okay.
for it.
I mean, the discussion has been solemn and the assessment grim, and the Ramite Sea is untouched. So I want to ask a question about pleasure, which has been kind of missing in the whole thing. So so when you're to everyone, so when you're making films that are broadly interrogating media practices or critical of media practices, do you think of pleasure at all when you're making films or writing texts, or does that kind of concede into the thing that you're critiquing? So yeah, this the place of pleasure in your work when you're dealing with media and media critical practices.
Thank you. And then another question over here. Yeah, let's take the next question, then we can, whoever wants to respond to whatever part.
I wanted to ask, refer to the U.S. Embassy paying for this talk, and I felt like it's really common that also on social medias, people, the social medias really thrive with people posting content that critiques them. So my question is, how do you feel maybe this talk also being part of this system, that your talk propagates this system? The system asks for people to talk, maybe, and does it improve or does it just continue this cycle?
Thank you. I really appreciate that question. Who would anyone like to start? I can address that later, but anyone want to start on the pleasure question?
I mean, on the pleasure one, I mean, I think for me it's like a really super important part of it. Like, I really want the things that I produce to have some kind of pleasurable affective quality or kind of experience. If it doesn't do that, then I don't know. I'm not. Yeah, if it doesn't do that, I'm not really that interested in myself. Not that, like, I can't guarantee that it would do that, but that's the question of pleasure is like really super important to me. And I think in a way I could argue that I think that is in relation to this sensitivity to the body or our bodies, I think it's just a really important part of actually sort of like both when we're making the films, and sort of the decisions that we make in terms of certain aspects of kind of making the films, is aside from the sort of basic kind of narrative, it's almost is principally driven by like creating this kind of pleasurable kind of affect, or thinking about how you can kind of manipulate that. But that's a really major part of the construction of the projects.
Yeah, I guess thinking about the experiences I have with my students, it's sort of like this Adorno-esque perverse pleasure of snapping yourself out of the pleasure that you've been accustomed to. Like, yeah, I think about this this Vietnam War video essay and how the students, even as they're critiquing it, they used the soundtrack of like Rolling Stones' "Give Me Shelter" instead of The Doors' "The End," which is the famous song that opens up Apocalypse Now. So they just thought like swapping one 60s rock song with another would like be enough to interrupt them. But I was like, why are you using this song that was really one of the most exploitive uses of an African American singer? Like she was pregnant, she was woken up in the middle of the night because Mick Jagger said, "I want her voice," and like was goading her to like scream until she almost had a miscarriage, even though it's like it is one of the most powerful vocal performances of any rock song I can think of. But and just getting them to think beyond just on the consumer level what aesthetic effects they want to employ, and just really think more intentionally about the deeper story behind everything on screen and everything in the soundtrack. I just find that very, very energizing for myself, just to kind of get them to go take the first step beyond just flat screen consumption and ultimately reach Angela mode, where you're out in the world and engaging and creating images of your own instead of consuming them. But I see this as a process.
Angela, is there pleasure in your work?
Yeah, of course. There's lots of pleasure. I mean, totally. I mean, I'm sorry that you cannot feel it, but it's the problem with pleasure, no? The pleasure of the one is not the pleasure of the other, or something, maybe. So now, for example, I think to think about more effectivity in terms of pleasure. So because I like to think, I think that's my pleasure, right? And when you get into this process of montage, and so you start thinking, and it's exploding, it's whoa, where can this go, and this, and so it's big pleasure, and so you have to calm down because it's too much, and so maybe so drawing could be a good continuation of this because it's very effective, and all these art things, like the least effort and the greatest everything in one drop, one line, the whole world, and blah blah. So you have all these thinking modes with these machines, and this is a great pleasure, and it demands a lot of physicality, which is sometimes something you have to pay off also. So that's also painful at some point. And there I think one needs also to ask what is somehow more effective or less, less tiring physically or something like that. So I think I can make progress on the question. Doing basically nothing, being absolutely non-extractive, drawing lines, and perhaps think as much. I don't know.
You think it's possible to be absolutely non-extractive?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Speaking of that, I don't like the question about the U.S. Embassy and systems and talking. That's something that I've thought a lot about. Maybe you all have as well, because we all deal with systems that are out of our control. We don't always support those systems, and sometimes we're actually opposed to those systems. Yet we still talk. For instance, as educators, or as as artists, performers, as people engaged in events like this. But yeah, I teach at the University of California, which in one way you could think about as an extractive machine that's about the mass production of indebtedness. It's doing this in a massive way that's I'm completely opposed to. And I've thought about how the university basically sells my labor and what I think of as critical, even radical content to draw students in, to get them indebted. This is part of a vicious system that I despise and I actively try to organize against. But I don't think silence is the answer. Like I do think we need to keep talking about this stuff. It's more needed than ever these days, arguably. I think within the conditions of repression that are dominant right now, we need to keep talking and to have an exchange of critical ideas. That's not all we should do. There's more that needs to be done, like organize, like activism, like engage in the necessary battles that Angela is showing, for instance, in her film, where indebtedness becomes a form of civil war, right? Or a war by other means that's not bloody, but it's still violent. So I think it's necessary to engage critically, and I guess this is maybe my last comment. It's an endorsement of what the Critics Week can do, right? That it's fostering criticality that's deeply needed. It's urgent at this point. Would any of you like to add something like a last comment before we wrap? I think we should wrap it up and move to the informal part of having some drinks.
There was nobody bringing up the political situation of the U.S. and Palestine and Israel and so on. I was
now you want to bring that up.
No, because I was so it was in Greece, and of course I read all this news in Germany and everything, and I say, oh my God, it's scary to come to Germany. I really thought that, because maybe you say the wrong thing and then it has a huge effect on, and I'm certainly easily saying the wrong things at some point. So, in that sense, I must say that it is perhaps also some sort of chimera that is put up with this press and media coverage on all the pressure that is put onto artists and curators and programmers and so on. And perhaps it's as much a chimera as the chimera of the border of Europe that they try to always depict as some very effective. It is quasi-effective, but not completely effective. And thousands of people come every day. So it's more or less a chimera also. So, but I must just say that despite of being scared, I also agree with you. We must speak and exchange and talk, and the more we can, the better it is. So, yeah, I agree with that position. I also agree with the position that we cannot resume the positions from one perspective and so on, blah, blah. So let's go on and talk somehow.
And there is a workshop tomorrow. I don't know if it's fully booked, but if you're in this workshop, yeah. But if those who are in this workshop will learn why Singing in the Rain is one of the most ecologically disastrous masterpieces of all time. Just there's this really great essay I can urge you to read. You can find it online, called 500,000 Kilowatts of Stardust by Hunter Vaughan. And it's the title refers to a famous line in the film where Gene Kelly brings Debbie Reynolds into a Hollywood studio. Is like, you know, I've got 500,000 kilowatts of stardust to show you. And, you know, it's very meant to be this magical sentiment of what movies can do using tremendous resources of electricity and just, yeah, through an ecological lens, you just have to reconsider this phrase. And then the iconic scene of Gene Kelly singing in the rain took multiple days and tons of water to use, and actually exposes the special privileges that Hollywood had towards water rights, at the expense of citizens. So, I mean, you get this question of pleasure, you know, like this is one of the most pleasurable movies ever made, yet at what cost? But then but I'd like to argue that getting snapped out of the spell that this movie casts and starting to be conscious of a larger or more profound ecological reality can be its own form of pleasure. It's like, okay, I learned something from this, and I can actually think more responsibly and more holistically, you know, and maybe less extractively about my relationship to films and relationship to the world. So,
I mean, I would just say in terms of the, the last question, I think, again, it goes back to kind of, I guess, the complicity. And I think my position just is that we're like complicit right from the start, but then from that position, I think the task is to try and find, like, navigate through that and find those kind of spaces and opportunities to develop like forms of critique, and whether that's through discussions or whether that's through making films or making any kind of creative work. I think that's the sort of task and the responsibility, and it may not always land, but I guess, like, in a way, like, what other choice do we have? So I think it's more from sort of that position, and it's a kind of, for me it's like a call of action or sort of like challenge to say, okay, like, you're in this situation, like, what can you do? Like, okay, you say that you're creative, or you say that you're intelligent, or you say that you've like got this critical position, then put it to work, kind of thing. And like, obviously it doesn't always land, but I think that's the challenge, I think.
Well, I'd like to say huge thanks to Angela, Kevin, and Daniel, and thanks for staying with us. And please join us for drinks.